Southwark is a wonderful place if you like your historic railways, which I do. In fact, when I think of Southwark, one of the first things I think of is all the railway viaducts that crisscross it. I love a good viaduct, me. With so many railways, it should come as no surprise that there are also a few abandoned stations. Today we're going to look at Borough Road, a station that was practically abandoned even while it was still open. This is the site of the station. The line it's on is still very much in service. It's on the very busy Thameslink route between Elephant and Castle and Blackfriars. There really isn't very much to see here. Perhaps the best evidence of its existence can be seen on Google Earth. You can very clearly see that the tracks part to give space for platforms. So that's what is there now. What was there before? Borough Road was opened in 1864 by the London, Chatham and Dover Railway. I covered the history of this line in my video on another abandoned station along here, namely Camberwell. But, brief recap. The London, Chatham and Dover Railway built this line partly as a commuter railway for themselves, but mostly to create a connection between the Metropolitan Railway at Farringdon and the main lines of South London that other railway companies could pay to use. But what's quite interesting about public transport in the 19th century was that they were still figuring it out. These days, we can say that certain journeys are best made by bus. Some are more suited to light rail or metro systems, and some are jobs for heavy rail. These days, we know that railways are best for high speeds over long distances. Well, usually. I mean, if you've ever been stuck outside Blackfriars waiting for a signal, you might dispute that high speeds bit. But I'm sure you get the gist. Stop rambling, idiot. OK, so the point I'm making is that the London, Chatham and Dover Railway built several stations quite close together because they were basically the only game in town, public transport-wise. London wasn't as big in the 1860s as it would become, but South London was still a well-populated place. Borough Road is, as its name implies, in the Borough, also known as Southwark. That's the district immediately south of the Thames, and therefore immediately south of the city. It was traditionally quite an industrial place, a good place to stick the kind of businesses you don't want fouling the air in the city and the West End. It seemed to the London, Chatham and Dover boys that there was a market for a station here. The station they built was a low-budget affair. At street level, the entrance was built into the arches of the viaduct. This is a low-cost way to build a station. It means you don't have to acquire any more land. At track level, the platforms and buildings were constructed from timber. Initially there were only 2 platforms, but the line itself became very heavily used. So in the 1880s, 2 extra tracks were built. Now there would be 2 tracks to take the London, Chatham and Dover's trains and 2 to take everyone else's. Accordingly, Borough Road became a 4-platform station with an island in the middle. That island formed the bits where the tracks part that I mentioned earlier. The southern end was on Borough Road. The northern end was on what's now Weber Street. But it turned out quite early on that the company had misjudged their market. As I said earlier, Southwark was a fairly industrial area, fairly working class. People tended to live within walking distance of where they worked, and before cars, people had a broader definition of walking distance. So there wasn't much of a market for people commuting to Borough Road. In the 1860s, the London, Chatham and Dover's line terminated at Ludgate Hill, which was an easy walk from Borough Road. Other railway companies could get you further via the various links off the Metropolitan Railway, but for a lot of people it just wasn't worth the fare. Then there were the trams. South London loved its trams, and here the problem was particularly acute. Let me superimpose the tram lines onto this aerial photo. Tram lines up basically all the main roads. Trams offered cheap fares, they served more places, and from 1904 they were electrified. It will come as no surprise that as soon as they appeared they started eating into the already low passenger numbers at Borough Road. In fact, to add insult to injury, there used to be a tram depot right here next to the station, where the Tesco is. So the railway companies cut back. The London, Chatham and Dover allowed very few trains to stop there. Anecdotally, it could be as few as 1 a day, and I'm guessing that was likely one of those legal requirements. Other companies ran a few more trains, and I think their connections meant that they did better out of Borough Road than its builders ever did. The station could be staffed by 3 people. I realise that actually 3 station staff sounds like a pretty reasonable number in these days of greater automation when we don't send everything by train. But back then that was the sort of staffing level you'd expect at a sleepy branch line station in the countryside. To the majority of commuters into London, Borough Road was probably nothing more than a sign that you were nearing your destination. The killing blow was dealt by the Underground. In 1890, the City and South London Railway opened their own Borough station. This is now on the Northern Line. Compared to the London Chatham and Dover line, this was the future. Electric trains with an attractively low fare. In 1904, the trams also embraced electricity. Meanwhile, the Chatham boys were having problems of their own. Competition with their rivals, the South Eastern Railway, had driven them to the point of ruin. In 1899, the two companies semi-amalgamated into the South Eastern and Chatham Railway. What they did not need was a station that was losing money. Since the people of Borough had been electrically enlightened, the SECR decided that they were beaten there, and cut their losses. On the 1st of April 1907, Borough Road closed for good. There are no calls to reopen it. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do hit the like button. There's actually an awful lot of abandoned stuff on this line, so I doubt this is the last time I'll cover it. Subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified when I do. Thanks as ever to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon. You are the one train a day to my semi-abandoned station. And I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.